Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is Tim McDermott. Tim is currently serving as the president of MLS club Philadelphia Union. Tim walked us through his entire career so far, which spans across the NFL, NHL, NBA, and now, of course, the MLS. Tim broke down what it's like and what it takes to run a successful sports organisation, including how the Union sold out all of their home games last season, what it was like for him to transition from being a three-time club CMO to now being a president, and so much more. This conversation is well and truly filled with golden nuggets of wisdom, insights, and fascinating stories from one of the sports industry's sharpest minds. With all of that being said, I think it's time for us to get into it, so let's start the episode. All right, well, good morning, Tim. Thank you for sharing some of your time with us today and coming on to share some insights. So David and I, of course, know a bit about you in the background. We've done a good fair bit of digging. But for anyone who's listening that isn't familiar with who you are, would you mind just sharing a bit about who Tim McDermott is as a person and then what your career has sort of looked like so far?
Sure. Yeah. Career-wise, I guess I've been in pro sports now for since 1995. So that's almost 30 years, which is kind of scary to think. I've been with a host of different teams, NFL, NBA, NHL, and the last, I guess, 9 seasons now with MLS as a president of my MLS team. So the journey has been, for the most part, like I said, pro sports. I started my, coming out of Cornell, I started with Jacksonville Jaguars, then the San Diego Chargers, took a little brief hiatus going to business school, went to Harvard Business School. And then after that, did not go right back into the world of sports, but actually was really impressed by all of the frameworks that I thought my colleagues at business school had by coming out of the Goldman Sachs's of the world and Coca-Cola's and P&G's and McKinsey's, et cetera. And so I spent a little bit of time outside of sports right after business school, spent about 3 years or so at Comcast. In their strategic planning group. And then I did get the itch to go back into the sports world. Like I said, at which point I've been to the Eagles a couple times, the 76ers, the Washington Capitals, and now Philadelphia Union.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely a very impressive portfolio of companies there. I think we've spoken with a couple of people that have been in a couple of different sports, but not quite going for the Grand Slam that you're going for over there.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is, I think when you're in the business side, it's all the same stuff. If you're on the sports side, it obviously would be much, much harder to translate from, if you're in baseball operations to football operations or to soccer operations, from a salary cap standpoint, coaching standpoint, those are pretty different. But I think from a business standpoint, if the basic blocking and tackling that occurs, the different ways that the teams make money is all the same ways for the most part. There's nuances, of course, to each of those teams, each of those leagues. Particularly probably on the media side of the house, that's probably where you see a lot of the nuances, I'd say, TV rights, et cetera. But for the most part, if you're selling sponsorship at, an NFL team or, you're selling sponsorship at a baseball or basketball, NBA, like, it's a lot of the same principles that get applied, I'd say, same revenue streams. There may be a different level of zeros attached to them, depending on the league that you're in. But yeah, I think it gives you the ability to kind of, from a business standpoint, kind of go between leagues, relatively easy. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Has there been any, I guess, when you've changed teams and therefore locations or changed leagues, things that have been, I'm sure at the beginning of your career, there were a lot of, we always speak about these unknowns in the sports business world. Have there been any of those that have crept up as you've moved somewhere else, whether that's geographical unknowns that were challenges or getting used to a new league or, to your point, new, rules and regulations around the fees and everything like that?
Yeah, it's so it's interesting because I've worked on the East Coast and West Coast. And I was actually born in Nebraska, so I've always felt some sort of kinship towards the Midwest as well, and always appreciated my upbringing. Even though I was really brought up in the East Coast, a lot of my mom's side of the family was from Iowa and Nebraska, so being able to go over there and really kind of appreciate a different lifestyle, so to speak, much more rural, I thought was always good for me personally. So yeah, when you go from East Coast to West Coast, I mean, there are definitely some differences, and I think learning culturally, kind of what those are, and me having to adapt, not other people having to adapt to me. I think was a learning exercise for me to go through, especially going from like I said, East Coast to San Diego. So that was definitely a learning curve. I think the other one for me that's been really interesting is being in the MLS, in the world of soccer. I guess there's some definite differences and nuances to being in the world of soccer, mainly because the global kind of ecosystem of which soccer plays in versus the very national ecosystem, for the most part United States, North America based ecosystem that an NFL team plays in, or even the NBA, even though obviously there's some international components to that, but for the most part, they're really confined in the NFL, I'd say, to the the 300 plus colleges or whatever it is that they're dealing with. And I think that the nuance of being in a MLS world or a soccer world where you've got a governing body of FIFA and you've got this kind of ecosystem where you're trading players internationally, which means cultural differences, right, between countries and agents. And so there's definitely a lot of nuance, I think, in the soccer world from that perspective. It's certainly been a little bit of a learning curve for me as it relates to that. But at the end of the day, again, like I said, it's a lot of the same stuff. We're selling sponsorship, we're selling ticketing, we're growing our brand, we're trying to generate revenue, we're thinking of our media broadcasts, et cetera. And how do we create scale in the MLS? So we're just a little bit earlier on, right? The league's only been around for 28, 29, 30 years now. And our team's been around for about 15. So, compare that to the rest of the teams that are in Philadelphia, and they've got a 100-year head start on us. So I think in the first 15 years of this organization, the first 25, 30 years of the MLS, the trajectory that it's been on has been phenomenal. The growth has been incredible. And I think the things that this organization and this league have done in the first chapter is pretty special. It's probably why you see so many people kind of buying into the MLS at this point in time. A lot of the power and influence that has gone into the league or bought into the league over the last 5, 6, 7 years is pretty amazing. And you're seeing people from the NBA, from the NFL, a lot of the other sports leagues that have kind of been through it. And, kind of say, hey, I've seen this movie before and know how this looks and works. And I like the factors that can make the MLS very successful. So yeah, I think it's going to be a good ride for soccer in America over the next several decades.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the big things we've probably spoken with every guest about is this next 5 to 10 year window of this sort of golden platform, and how do we harness everything that comes from the tournaments that are coming, the fact that Messi's in the league now, and what impact might that have on players wanting to come over. So what's your sort of outlook? We usually leave this question right till the end, but what's your outlook for the next, 5, 10 years of when the tournaments are all here, how the popularity will build and then once they've come and
Yeah.
gone, that sort of impact, because it all starts really, at the youth level of impacting them and impressing them at early ages with these tournaments. And then, 10 years later, when those 7-year-old kids are now, of college age, how do you sort of look at this next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah. So I'll go back when I decided to come over to the MLS. I thought the ingredients for soccer were kind of finally right. The ubiquity of soccer in the United States, the youth systems that were in place, the ubiquity of fields and facilities and coaching, and just much more structured compared to when I was a kid. Where you'd play an 8-year-old be playing on some gigantic 11v11 field, and maybe, once or twice a week of practice and a game. And it's just so much more structure and um, just well thought out. So from that standpoint, it's massively better. I think the ubiquity of the sport on apps, right, on YouTube, if you want to, look up or Google how to do a Maradona, you can now understand skills and drills. You've got the ubiquity of the sport on TV or on streaming all over the place, and not just MLS, but you can go on TV or some sort of internet and find any game around the world now every day. So, and really, I remember one day, I think my son at the time was maybe 8 years old or so, 7 years old. And I came home from work and he was watching Turkey and Iceland play on TV. And I was like, wow, like he probably has no idea, where these countries are located. But here he is, watching them on TV. And I was like, just all the ingredients I felt were right. So that was kind of like my theory, my hypothesis getting into it. And I would say over this 9 year cycle, it probably exceeded what I thought it would be. And what I didn't anticipate is, like I said before, the power and influence of all of these other owners from the other leagues buying into the MLS and really giving that some real gas. And the trajectory, like I said, now has been pretty amazing. So now you're seeing, especially like the last 5, 6, 7 years, all of the new teams are just home runs, right? Whether it's Cincinnati, St. Louis's, Austin's, I mean, they are just home run grand slams. And so I think the next question for the league is done an awesome job, right? We're up to 30 teams. So that trajectory has been like this. And now the question is, how do we go from there to up here? And is that just a matter of time? Does it just take 10, 20, 30 years for that to happen? Or is there a way for us to accelerate that growth, right? We often talk about doubling our fan base, and looking at the various potential influences that are happening, i.e. Club World Cup or the World Cup coming, and what can that do to the sport? So I think a lot of people are very bullish on the fact that those events are happening. But I'd be careful to say that just because of those events, that all of a sudden the MLS is going to, grow. I think we can, and I think we should, but we got to be really smart about that and be thoughtful about how do we connect the dots between Club World Cup coming, World Cup coming, and MLS, and in our case, the Philadelphia Union, and make sure that we're woven into that story. Otherwise, I think it'll just be an event, it'll be a neat event, but I don't think we'd capture what we can capture. So we got to be really thoughtful of what that looks like. And then I think we're also trying to figure out, hey, macro level, like the opportunity for us is how do we get more of the sports fans that do like the Flyers, the Sixers, the Eagles, the Phillies? How do we get more of them, to start becoming fans of the Philadelphia Union? And again, the question there is that simply generational? So if I think about, maybe typically fandom starts between the ages of like 6 and 9, maybe up to 12 years old. That's really when fandom starts in sports. A lot of that is parental influence, right? So you think about an Eagles fan, an Eagles mom and dad that, they love the Eagles, and it's a Sunday and they got a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old. And that Sunday comes and they're putting, little Johnny in the green jersey, and, they're putting the TV on, and they've maybe made a big meal. They've got friends over, they're cheering, they're screaming, they're yelling, whatever it may be. And Johnny knows that something really special is happening, something very unique is happening. Maybe then Johnny, on the Friday before, was told, hey, in elementary school, everybody's going to wear their Eagles green on Friday. And so they're getting kind of all of these social influences, parental, school, et cetera, that are saying there's something really unique about, in this case, I'm using the Eagles as an example, and I should therefore root for them, right? So I think the question for us is, how do we as the union, how do we as MLS teams get ourselves into that sort of a ecosystem where that sort of behavior is happening? And what does that look like? How do we kind of, make that happen? So we're all trying to study that and figure out, okay, like if that is the way fans become fans, what does it look like then for us at the union to create more fans, at that age and beyond, and getting those people who do like the Phillies, the Eagles, the Flyers, the Sixers to say, yeah, I'm in on the union as well. That's our big challenge. Is like I said, scale, awareness, growing the brand, getting it out there. I think a lot of people right now are looking at the quality of the players, and there's certainly discussions around the quality of the league. Um, I think our league is phenomenal. I think our league is growing. I think you're seeing the referential play that we have in like the Leagues Cup, and shoot, the last 4 teams standing in the Leagues Cup are all MLS teams. Now that's, again, people will say, well, you got a chance to play them on your home field. Sure, got all that. But just across the board, I think we look at where we are with Liga MX, and I feel like it's fair to say that we've caught Liga MX. They have some top 6 teams that I'd say are really good. We have probably more teams of higher quality than they do. They obviously have a top 6 that are quite good, but I would say soup to nuts, top to bottom, I think our 30 teams are just as good as what they have. So I think referentially, we're doing a good job now. We're showing that, hey, this is an incredible league. Obviously, it helps to have people like Messi coming into the league and creating storylines. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest things that we need to do better, though, as the league is what are those stories, right? What are those storylines? And making sure that we're leaning into those. And I think we can do a little bit better job from that perspective. I'm excited about what the league's going to start doing from a marketing perspective and pushing that, and I think the teams then following suit. But I think that's probably one of the biggest areas that we can take advantage on, improve on, and take advantage of, is making sure that we all have stories that we're sharing. If you think about the NFL has this amazing cadence to it, right? So going into a game, the buildup going into a game, there's all these pregame shows. They're happening on TV. They're happening on the team's website, right? The battles that are going to happen between Team A against Team B and all the storylines that go into it. Then you have this amazing broadcast. I think the NFL, just the broadcasts are special, really, really great. And then you have the post-mortem, right? And you have 2 days of, whether you won or lost, you have 2 days of discussion on radio, on TV, on the web, etc., talking about it. And then they repeat and they do it again. There's this amazing cadence that happens in the NFL. And I think for us, we got to figure out, like, what does that look like for us? How do we create a rhythm like that, building it up, having the game, the post-mortem, building it back up, right? And we need to figure that out a little bit better.
Yeah. Specifically touching on kind of the storylines that you were talking about, I think that is a really important thing going forward. I think that there's a lot of things going on in each club, specifically with youth development or maybe community involvement and whatnot, that isn't exactly public knowledge. And partially because of that, people aren't as involved or as fans with the club in their local area. Like, for example, because we're in the Bay Area, we know that the Quakes do a lot of grassroots stuff, but a lot of that isn't really public knowledge. And so in turn, the Quakes don't have like a huge turnout at their games. Obviously, they have their big games where they do get a lot of people because it's a huge event, but just on a week-to-week basis, a lot of people don't feel that kind of loyalty. And that's actually one thing I think you guys do really well at the Union. Specifically, not only are you guys a really good team now, but it took a while to build up, and now you kind of have had like a long kind of reign at the top, kind of those top 3-4 teams, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in the league. So that, number one, helps. But then also over the course of these last few years, you guys have done a really good job of youth development with the YSG Academy and bringing in players like obviously the Aronson brothers and now the Sullivan brothers. Do you think that teams being more invested in storylines like those and being more invested in publicizing their types of grassroots efforts, do you think those are kind of the storylines that you're talking about and things that could get people more involved?
Yeah, I'll say 2 different ways. One is, I can't speak specifically to other teams, but what I'd say is just at the Union, if we do something in the community, if there's an event, if there's something from our community relations group, our foundation, whatever it may be, we'll put our efforts and energy to getting that to as much publicity as possible. But I will say, if the same thing, the same event were to happen at the Phillies or at the Eagles, they just naturally are going to get more cameras, more visibility to do the exact same thing that we just did. So that's frustrating, quite frankly, sometimes, because you're like, man, we just did the same thing, or we're doing this, and yet, it doesn't get covered to the same degree, doesn't get the natural publicity to the same degree as, one of the teams in another league. And so hopefully that'll change. And part of that process of changing is, I think, in the hiring process, like we've been very strategic around, from a PR standpoint, hiring publicists into our PR group. So a lot of PR groups, particularly I think in NFL in particular, are probably more inbound, take the calls, working with the coach, the players, etc. And we're much more outbound, like we were working for a company, like you're working for some third, consumer packaged good company, and like, how do we get our story out there? We're pitching. So that concept has helped us get a lot of earned media inside of the Philadelphia DMA. But yeah, we work at it, and I always say to people, like, one of the beauties of working in an MLS world is when you go to work at the MLS, like, you're going to go work for 99 cents on the dollar. You're going to work for 99% of that revenue pie. If you go to work at another league, a lot of that revenue pie is the local or national TV deals, which are typically locked up for a pretty long time. And so you may not have a lot of influence over that revenue pie. You're maybe talking about the last 40% of that revenue pie that you can actually shape, because so much of it is, either local or national TV. Whereas I think in MLS, like, you're going to, every dollar you create, make, whatever, generate is valuable, is meaningful. At the same time, if you're in an NFL world, you put out a press release and say, hey, at 2:00 today, we're going to have a press conference. You'll have, 10, 15, 20 people show up, to that press conference. In our world, we're going to call 20 people. We're going to sell them on why they need to come to the press conference, right? And we're going to work, and we're going to get, not as many people to show up, right? So, but what I would say on that is, that's not a knock as much as it is, A, little bit just where we are in our cycle, and B, the skills that I think you get from that are much, much more relative to working in corporate America, right? Where you've got to work to pitch that story. You're making you're announcing a new product line, and you're at, whatever, water company X, or, beverage company, B, you got to work to make that pitch, right? Somebody's, they don't just show up, right? So sometimes I think, one of the great stories I had in my career, I was working for the for the Eagles, and I went down and became the chief marketing officer for the Washington Capitals. And about a year into my being there, I was having lunch with a colleague, and we were just talking about, hey, it's been a year since I've been now at the Washington Capitals, and he was like, hey, people, generally like working with you, working for you. You're doing a good job here, but you don't know how to sell tickets. And I was like, what do you mean I don't know how to sell tickets? I just came from the NFL. I came from the Eagles, and we had a wait list. He's like, exactly. You don't know how to sell tickets. And my probably initial anger and kind of disbelief and rejection of that, denial of that, was, over, time, I was like, you know what? He was exactly right. Like, I didn't understand the process to sell a ticket when you've got a ton of inventory, and how to package it, how to price it, how to promote it. That is a very different world than a lot of the NFL teams go through, where it's, here's the invoice, customer, you've got 14 days to pay it, or we go to the next person in line. That's very, very different. And so it really was hard for me to hear that feedback at the time, but it was probably the best piece of feedback, because it was true. And I really then had to buckle down and say, okay, what does it really look like to be in a environment where you have to sell tickets? And then again, going back to what I said before, that skill set of selling tickets, whether you're, an NBA, NHL, baseball, us, that skill set is much more analogous to skill sets in consumer packaged goods companies, where, like, they've got to sell. They got to sell more water. They got to sell more computers. They got to sell more pens, whatever it may be, right? And how do you take those skills and apply it there? They're much more analogous, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And so where did you go, or what did you look into to learn how to sell? Or did you just go through iterations of trial and error and trying to
So
figure out how it
I
works for
get,
yourself?
yeah, I would say when I was at the Capitals, there was a tremendous guy who's now, I think he's still there, he's the president there of Mighty Mouse Sports Entertainment. And, he was a ticketing guy, a sales guy. And, he just had a lot of tricks and, things that he had tried in the past. And, it was just, observing it, learning it, studying it, studying the reports, understanding the cadences or processes, et cetera. And so I was fortunate to be around a guy like that. And then same thing, I was at the Sixers where, we were in a situation, and when we got there, we had a lot of inventory at the start of, trust the process, and we had a lot of inventory to sell. So I think the NBA does a phenomenal job of, teaching, coaching people on how to understand the sales process, ticketing sales process, and what that looks like, both the selling and the service part, quite frankly.
Yeah, definitely. And then I know you've been CMO of three different teams in three different leagues, and obviously now marketing is under your entire umbrella at the union. So aside from, I guess, that difference in trying to attract PR attention, ticket sales, what have been some of the other differences in how you've had to go about your marketing strategy, your awareness initiatives across the different leagues, and to your point, the different budgets and the natural attention that different teams get?
Yeah, that definitely depends on the team and the league and kind of where they are in that market. The Eagles are in a position where, they are definitely, the king of Philadelphia. And so when you do something there, you're going to get noticed for it. You're going to get the earned media for it. And so, and I always say in that environment, you're really maximizing opportunities. If you're in sales, you're maximizing the sales that you can get. I think when I was first at the Washington Capitals, they probably had, I don't know, 9,000 people, 10,000 people coming to games compared to where they are now in the Ovechkin era. And so, having or trying to get more brand awareness, trying to get a seat at the table, so to speak, in that sports town ecosystem. And same way for us, I think now here at the Union, it's like, how do we kind of make this town go from a 4-for-4 sports town to a 5-for-5 sports town? And it's hard. Like it's a lot. It's a lot of grinding to do that, and you're going to work considerably, I'd say harder to pop through and get attention, to get yourself that seat at the table. And like I said, we're trying to accelerate this as much as possible, so that maybe things that will organically happen in 10, 20 years, can we make that happen in a shorter period of time? So yeah.
Definitely. And I had read that last season, and maybe it happened before, and maybe you're on course this season as well, but I'd seen an article that you had sold out all of the home games last season. So you've clearly learned how to sell those tickets pretty well. So what have been
Yeah.
some of those key ingredients behind all of, the efforts and the framework that have allowed you to get to where you are now with that?
Yeah. So I would say first off, success on the field and success off the field definitely go hand in hand. I think the opportunity for the business side is to maximize the success. I always tell people our job is, here's low, here's high. Our job is to go like this, right? This is where you're going to be if you're not so good. This is going to be if you're good. And our job is to make that low not as low, make that high higher, shift everything up, right? And that's how I can say that you're outperforming an index. That's what our job is, to outperform an index and kind of shift everything up, regardless of what's happening, on the field. And so to do that, though, you got to have really great people. You're hiring really great people first and foremost. And there's not a lot of, Kentucky Fried Chicken secret sauce recipe type stuff that we got going. Like at the end of the day, sports teams, it's a lot of just what's in, the hard work that people put forth and what's in their mind and working together. So creating an environment where culturally, I think, we have really good people that work with us. People have kind of a seat at the table. I'm a big believer in that, and making sure that they all have a voice. It's not a dictatorship. It's, hey, it's like a lot of great people, a lot of smart people. Let's do this together. Um, and then I'm really big on like processes and making sure that you've got all that ready, because you don't know when. It's hard to predict what's going to always happen on the pitch, on the field. So again, our job is to maximize success, be ready for, hey, when that opportunity comes, like in the case of the union, like, there was, when we first got here, I think I got here in 2016. The team had gone from, selling out games when they were first launched in 2010 to basically every year about 500 new, or 500 less, 500 less season ticket holders every year. And over a course of 6-7 years, that's a significant amount of bleeding that happened, that you may not recognize or notice it year over year. But if you kind of go from, hey, here's where you were to here's where you are today, that's a lot of people that left. So we were able to kind of stop, put in all the right the right ingredients I talked about, the right people, the right processes, et cetera, kind of stop that, start to try to back up. And then when the team started to hit their stride, then you take advantage of that. And it's been a good trajectory since.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's been a big theme, right? Anytime we ask about the framework, the structure behind everything, everyone always goes to the people. And we always throw the question back to, because we're always speaking to C-suite members, presidents who are now, they've gone through this cycle of they were the ones getting hired and managed and overseen, and now the tables have been flipped and they're at the top. When it comes to hiring people for the union and at past roles where you're hiring for the marketing side of things, all of the technical expertise and background aside, what have been some of those other sort of characteristics or values that people have that you're looking for when you're trying to slot people into this machine that you have and the ship that you're continuously building while it's sailing even further?
Yeah, I mean, number one is just work ethic, hard work. Like I don't think there's any replacement for that. I don't necessarily always believe you have to be the, maybe the brightest, smartest, whatever. It's certainly beneficial if you are, but that in the absence of hard work is a no-go. Like we need people who want to work hard, and I'd rather have somebody who is an A- B plus, and if they're willing to grind, they're willing to outwork their competition. Eventually, I know that they'll get there. So if they have the right work ethic, I'm really big on that. I'm also really big on people who culturally have to root for each other. I've been in environments where that hasn't always been the case, and so I'm really big on, person A's success is not at the detriment of person B's success, and both people should root for each other and cheer for each other and celebrate then each other's successes. I think that's really important in an organization. So I think we do that pretty well here. And then just being, strategic about it. Like, somebody who's got a really, strategic mindset. I appreciate that. That they can think through a complicated situation and figure out how to kind of unwind the chaos to figure out what's a really go forward plan look like. Those are the people I think have been, pretty successful in our organization. We have a pretty broad organization. That we have our union first team, which is, what most people see. We have our second team in Union 2. We have 9 academy teams, and then we have a bunch of real estate. We have about 500,000 square feet of real estate space that we lease out around our property. We've bought about 100 acres of land, so we now own or control about 100 acres of land. We're developing a sportsplex adjacent to our stadium. That's a new $75 million sportsplex that has 7 outdoor fields and 170,000 square feet of indoor space, and running that as a kind of a for-profit venture, and doing, skills drills, camps, clinics, programming, not just in soccer, but whatever, lacrosse, field hockey, basketball, volleyball, whatever it may be. So, we have our hands full with a lot of stuff. So from land acquisition to running different businesses, trying to transform an area. Our campus is situated in Chester, which is about 12 minutes from the airport. And it's got the Delaware River right across from it, so it separates us from New Jersey. I-95 is literally right there. So it's got some unique assets, but at the same time, it's in a tough, area, an area that's, historically been a lower socioeconomic area. So we're trying to figure out like how can we be a great partner with them and trying to help kind of change them, help them grow economically. So it's a lot, it's a lot to do, but it's exciting, it's fun.
Yeah. And one of the things I notice is throughout your career, kind of you've been mostly involved in marketing at all of the different clubs that you've been at. With the union, it's your first role as the president of the organization. So a lot more falls underneath your kind of umbrella of responsibilities. And a lot of people also that we've spoken to have mentioned the kind of importance of with new stadium development, the importance of real estate and getting the surrounding real estate involved with the club and whatnot. So that just adds another facet to the business that you're now responsible for. What in your transition from kind of the marketing world into the overall club management world, what was kind of the biggest thing that you didn't know about that you had to learn about? And then also which of the things, whether you knew about it or not, which kind of aspect of the business had the highest learning curve?
Yeah. So I definitely spent a fair amount of time in the marketing side. But I think that was probably more of something that I had to learn. I don't know if it was just as natural for me. I was probably much more of a kind of like a strategist, understanding how to generate revenue. So that was probably more my natural and how I started really. After I was in when I really first started, I was in football operations. That's where I did my first experience in football operations with Jacksonville Jaguars. Um, and then went over to the sponsorship side and sold sponsorships there and at the San Diego Chargers for some time. So that's kind of how I started. And I always felt like I had a good appreciation for sales strategy. And then I after business school went into more marketing roles to kind of have all those pieces. Um, what I would say first and foremost, the difference between being any role, chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, whatever it is, to a president, I think is at the end of the day, you're responsible for every piece. And what I mean by that is if we don't hit a ticketing number, and we've got, a young staff of 23, 24-year-old, 25-year-old people, they may not have hit their numbers, right? And I can't just say, oh, well, Bob or Sue or Jill, they didn't do a great job. No, I didn't do a great job, right? There's something that I didn't do, whether it be management, leadership, training, whatever it is, that didn't allow them to have the success that they should be having. And so I think at the end of the day, you're having this sense of responsibility for the broad picture. So if there's, this is an extreme example, but if there's weeds in the flower bed, that's on me, right? So I am trying to ensure that I hire the right people, that they think a certain way, that they're detail oriented, they're process oriented, that they have a mindset of hard work, they have a mindset of excellence, so that they're almost a step ahead of me, right? And thinking that way. But because at the end of the day, all those pieces I'm responsible for, right? And I can't shirk that responsibility. I can't say, well, that's John didn't get his job done, or Bob didn't get a job done, or Sue didn't get their job done. That's not the right way to think about it. It's on me. I have that responsibility to ensure that people are motivated, people know what the goals are, people know what the objectives are, what the expectations are, that I'm clearly communicating it to others. And if something doesn't happen, then like I said, that's on me. We just did this town hall and we had our owners up there, myself, our coach, our general manager. And it was fascinating, the level of detail that certain people are asking. And they're asking me, something very, very specific. And I may not have been, intimately involved with it or directly involved with it. It might have been a person who is below, a person who works for me or a person who works for that person. But when they're feeling like we let them down, it does come back to me. And so I've got to ensure that, am I doing all that I can do to make sure that all the different facets of the company are operating at the level that I need them. So I think that's the one thing that I have a better appreciation for. I think the other thing is the mood of a company, when you walk into a company, you feel it, right? Any company, you can feel within the first 15 minutes of being in a company. There's a mood to a company. There's a feeling that you just feel from the people that are there. And I think that's been, for me, it's like, that's on me. So if I don't like what I'm feeling in the organization, then that's on me, right? To change that, to people are going to see, how am I walking around the organization? Am I grumpy and frumpy, or am I feeling good? Am I being negative? Or am I being positive? So a little bit of that is the realization of, like, if I don't like what I'm seeing, or that mood, that culture, it starts with me. And if I don't like it, then then I need to change maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of introspection and ownership and accountability is very impressive. And I know we've spoken with a few people that have referred to a similar, level of, when they're at the leadership position, that if something is going wrong beneath them, to not point fingers and not blame those individuals that might have been at the sort of forefront of a specific action or mistake going on, and knowing that that is something that maybe you should have prevented. A lot of people have spoken with, that's, you can read that in a book, but a lot of it is more seen from an example that they have had in the past of a leader. And so a lot of people referred to sort of different mentors and role models that people have had in the past that have shaped them into the individuals they are now, the leaders they are now. What have, and who have been some of your role models and leaders that you have had in past roles that you've looked up to and thought, yeah, that's, I want a piece of that when I'm at the top, and I want a piece of that when I'm at the top. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. For some reason, when you were saying that, what hit for me was, I don't know why, but I went back to, like, probably my high school days. Played football. I played football, baseball, wrestled up to like ninth grade, but really baseball and football through high school and then into college. And I think the big transformation that occurred in my life sometime around that high school time period was this concept of accountability, responsibility, and not making excuses. And I think earlier in my career, my life, when I was younger, and maybe this is normal, it's easy to kind of say, I didn't get the job done. I didn't have a great game. And because fill in the blank, right? It was the ref's fault. It was the ball was slippery. Something happened. My football cleat fell off, like, whatever. And I think early in my high school career, coach, who didn't love hearing that, and just made it clear, like, stop making excuses. And I think, while I was like, I'm not making excuses, I'm telling you the reasons, right? The truth of the matter is, I think when I transform that mindset to, yeah, you're right, like, just get it done, like, figure out a way. Don't make the excuse. Don't tell me the reason why it didn't happen. Tell me the reason it did happen. That was I think, a big transition in my life, and helped me to start improving how I performed in sports, quite frankly. Taking much more accountability, not looking at others and blaming others, not blaming circumstances, just saying, if whatever happened, maybe it wasn't my fault, my doing. Maybe there really was a real good reason for it, but I could have done better. Just accept that, whatever. It was raining and it's hard to throw a pass. I don't care. Figure out how to do it better. Figure out how to perform better. And so I think that, early on in my life was part of it. I was also, I had a mom and dad who really just ingrained a lot of that in me. My dad was a teacher and a college football coach. So he coached at Division II, Division III college football level. And so I always saw him, and honestly, the hard work that both of them put into, just they're, raising me. And, my dad, I think, would work, he must have worked, always had at least two jobs at any time, just trying to make it, trying to pay the bills. And my mom, really similarly, just, grinding. So we grew up in this environment where, I think my parents always wanted me and my brother to have better opportunities maybe than they had. And so, they were always trying to instill certain values, particularly the hard work and integrity in us. And so I felt that very early on in my life. It's always been, part of who we are. And so, if you know, my mom and dad would never be outworked by anybody, and they would sacrifice everything, for their kids. And what I mean by, it's vacations. It's working 2, 3 jobs, 5 jobs at certain times. It's doing everything and anything you can to, in their case, trying to do it better for their kids. And so I saw that, I witnessed it. I don't know that I understood it as necessarily when I was younger, but I always was in that concept of hard work, integrity. It's like that we talk about tough love. That was kind of our house was, do the right thing. If you screw up, you're going to hear about it, but we still love you. So that was very early on, I think, in my life. And then I think when I started with the Jaguars, I worked in football operations, like I said, for the first season, and I worked for a general manager there who had his law degree. So I always thought I was going to get my law degree. He was always like, "Hey, you really should go back to school and get your law degree." So that was, I was influenced by that pretty heavily. And the story on it is I ended up getting my MBA instead. And the story of how that happened was I actually did go through the 12-week class that, you go to sit for your law degree or LSAT. And it was like every Wednesday for 4 hours. And at the end of this 12-week cycle of going there from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock every Wednesday, I just had a really just not a very good instructor, quite frankly. And I didn't feel like I was necessarily prepared to take this test. So I went to the kind of the manager of this company, and I said, I don't think this person did a great job, and I'm not so sure that the 12 weeks was really worth the $1,200 I just paid. And so she said, okay, tell you what, enroll in the next 12-week cycle, and we'll let you do it all over again. Won't charge you, let you do it all over again. So I was like, okay. So I'm in the first class of the next 12-week cycle. And what typically happens is you take these diagnostic tests. So now I'm taking another diagnostic test, and about 25 minutes into this test in this classroom with whatever 20 people who were in this class, about 20, 25 minutes into it, I just stopped and I just go, you know what? I don't think I want to be a lawyer. And so took my paper, I walked to the front of the room. The person and the instructor at the front of the room is kind of looking at me funny. I'm like, I just handed him the paper and I was like, I don't think I want to be a lawyer. And I just walked out. I've never done anything like that in my life. It's probably the most spontaneous thing I ever did. And after that, I decided I'm going to go get my MBA and just studied on my own. Didn't go to class for that one. So that was how I eventually, decided to kind of get my secondary degree.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you follow a feeling in your gut and your instinct. And I mean, I think I did something similar in high school by dropping a chemistry class, but it wasn't quite the same level there. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think before we wrap up, I know we're getting close to time. One thing we've been doing is running a few quick fire questions. And I know we didn't send you these ones. Then they won't catch you off guard by any means, but just wanted, you to not be able to prepare for these ones. So to your point, there's a lot of sports going on in the area. There's sure a lot of other good things. I've never been to Philadelphia, but I'm sure there's a lot of other fun things you can spend your weekend doing. When it's a non-Philadelphia Union game day weekend, whether it's just an off weekend or it's the off season, how are you spending your weekend in Philadelphia?
That's easy. I am at a sporting event for my son or daughter nearly every weekend that I'm not, I guess, with the Union. So, I have a 16-year-old 10th grader boy and a 14-year-old 8th grader girl. So they are actively involved in sports. My son is a lacrosse player and wrestles. My daughter does field hockey. So there's no doubt that that's typically where I'm at. And then occasionally I'm up in Buffalo. My brother's the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. So if I get a chance to go and watch the game, I try to go up there. Don't get there as much as I'd probably like to, but yeah, that's what we're doing.
Great. that definitely seems like a running theme, doesn't it, David? That if it's not a game day weekend for the club you work for, it's a game day weekend for your kids.
Yes,
And being able
definitely.
to shift the balance in a weekend when you can. That's awesome.
We could talk for
Um,
another hour about youth sports. It's probably I'm incredibly passionate about it. It's amazing to see the kind of the sea shift, the change in youth sports that has occurred over the last, well, since when I was a kid, and like just how in depth the level of participation is, and what you need to do now to be an elite, athlete in any sport. It's amazing, really amazing.
yeah, that's something that took me by surprise coming from Northern Ireland, where you think of, and especially soccer, you think of it being as all that anyone wants to do. But then when I came over here and frankly from Northern Ireland back in early 20 teens sort of years, it was America just are not good at football. How can they be better than us? And then I came over and saw that the level of depth that the academies have, all of the private training that you see happening in any plot of grass when you're driving past a public park. It's clear to see that everything is a lot more, programmatic, and it's really
Yeah.
disciplined in, as opposed to that sort of freedom that you get in Europe and you see a lot of people getting into. But here it's all focused work, which can only breed results.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Um,
A lot of folks will ask me, how is it possible that, some smaller country can be as good or better than the United States in sports? Like, how is that possible? And I think a lot of it is, culturally in the United States, historically, we have been in this mode of like, okay, you're going to train soccer on whatever Monday and Wednesday and a game on Saturday. And then, the other days of the week, maybe you're playing another sport, or you got music lessons, or you got whatever, drama class, or whatever it is that, the kids did. And so very diversified. And we have a lot of options for our kids these days. And not that that's wrong, right? I think there's a lot of people who love the idea of kind of multi-sport, multifaceted. But I do think in some of the other countries, they don't have as many choices and options. And so you see kids that dribble the soccer ball to school. You see them playing recess is soccer, dribbling the ball home, playing unstructured play for a couple hours before they ever go to practice. And so a smaller country population wise can certainly be as competitive as the United States because they're touching the ball, 10x compared to our traditional way of doing it. Fast forward to today, I think you are seeing more of that specialization that is occurring. You're seeing the academies. And look, the truth of the matter is, to get into an academy, we're sourcing kids out of, players at a very, very young age, right? They're coming into our ecosystem, not just quite frankly at the U12 level, but we're finding, players at, U6 level, right? We know who some of the best kids are in the entire Philadelphia region by the time they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age. So if you want to get into an academy and you're going to have to be very, very, very talented, the kids that get into the academy that are of that supreme elite level are kids that have worked on it 5 days a week, 6 days a week. When they're 4 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old, those are the kids that are getting into the academies. And if you're not doing that, it's hard to have the foot skills that somebody who is doing that would have. So it's tough because I think everybody likes to talk about multi-sport and the benefits of multi-sport. But the truth of the matter is, whether it's soccer or whether it's another sport, my son, like I said, he's a wrestler, right? Well, if he is playing three sports and he goes into a tournament and he loses 3-2 to another wrestler who just plays one sport, he doesn't get to advance in the tournament. He lost. And nobody goes, well, it was 3-2, but boy, oh boy, he's a multi-sport athlete. Let's put him into the next round anyway. No, he's out. He's done, right? So there's a bit of hypocrisy, I think, when people talk about this concept of multi-sport. At the end of the day, people want to see, players that are good, right? And I appreciate, people talking about the multisport and the benefits of it, which is I understand, but it's hard to do multisport, and it's hard to do multisport at high levels anymore. Whereas like when I was a kid, you could be a really good football player and a really good baseball player, and even maybe a really good wrestler, right? Because that's what everybody was doing. Everybody was playing their sports 4 months out of the year. That was it. And now you take that 4 month out of the year wrestler and you put him against a 12 month out of the year wrestler, there's no chance that that person's winning. Right. And so then that person becomes discouraged, doesn't do it as much. This person goes on and it gets higher and higher. So it is the way I think our sports system is working these days. Not that it's wrong. I actually think it's quite interesting. And I think from a soccer perspective, is going to help us produce better players.
Definitely. I mean, that is the thing about Europe and the rest of the world, is that sort of monastic focus on one sport. You hear sort of generational athletes that are maybe, they were great rugby players in the UK and soccer players, and then they just have to choose one or the other. But for the most part, it's from those ages of 6, 7, you're just all in on soccer. You're all in on, fill in the blank sport. That's definitely a big difference. Yeah. One final question before we wrap up, and I'm sure you have a lot of great things to look forward to in the rest of your career. But if you look back for a second at everything you've done, what is one moment in your career that you are most proud of yourself for?
Oh, that's a good one. Proud of myself for, wow, that's a tough one. I I probably don't spend as much time reflecting on my personal accomplishments, I guess, or what I've done. Look, I do find a lot of enjoyment when I see what I'll call turnarounds. When I go back to the Washington Capitals and kind of where they were when I got there and where they were when I left, and the kind of the fact that they had really grown the brand, selling out, that massive seismic shift and change, and feeling that sense of accomplishment from doing that, I think is really satisfying. Same thing with the Union, of being kind of a team that, where we were really, like I said earlier, bleeding fans, and now turning it around and being in to a point where we're sold out. And I think last year we were one of 4 teams that were sold out. This year will be sold out again. So definitely a lot of satisfaction from kind of seeing that, hey, it can be done. Accomplishment, work hard, change it, grow it. I enjoy those things. I mean, certainly there's when you're in a Super Bowl, or when you're in an MLS Cup final or something like that, those are really highly memorable moments for sure. But I do take a lot of, enjoyment in those kind of turnaround situations where we've really grown something. And when it was hard too, right? I think it was not, easy to accomplish some of those things that we accomplished. I think those are really satisfying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a big difference between coming into an organization that's doing really well and just increasing bottom line or a specific department by 2% this year versus, we need to grow 40% in the next 3 years, and then being able to look back at ticking that box and surpassing it. That's excellent. Well, Tim, this has been an absolute pleasure to hear from you, learn your story, your insights that span across so many different teams and leagues, and definitely the most we've spoken to so far. So it's been amazing to hear from you and how you've navigated your career and peeked inside your brain a bit. I think it's clear to see how and why you've achieved the success you have so far, and definitely starting with that parental role model and the high school experience you've had has been a bit of a theme we've seen, of people coming out of their teens wanting more and not taking no for an answer, and failure, seeing it as learning has been a big theme. So thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Matt. Thank you very much. Matt and David, thank you guys. Fun to be on here. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on.
See you in the next one.